In the summer of 2013, Genevieve Rains vanished into the Montana night, leaving behind nothing but a cracked phone at the mouth of an abandoned mine. For 4 years, the case was a ghost, no suspects, no answers, only whispers in the small town of Alder. Then a grainy photograph, a barroom confession, and a hidden chamber deep within the Whitford mine began to unravel the darkness. What emerged was not just a story of murder, but of calculated cruelty, and of a community haunted by the knowledge that the truth had been buried in plain sight all along. By the time searchers found Genevieve Rains's phone, it was already clear something was wrong. The device lay face down in the dirt at the mouth of an abandoned silver mine, its glass spiderwebbed from a single, hard impact. There were no footprints in the surrounding dust, no discarded bag, no sign she had ever walked away from that spot. It was as if the earth had opened its mouth and swallowed her whole. 2 days earlier, Genevieve had been very much alive, laughing on the porch of a weathered cabin outside Alder, Montana, her pale blue jacket slipping from one shoulder in the late July heat. She'd come here with 3 friends from Spokane for a long weekend in the mountains, a trip she had pushed for with stubborn enthusiasm. The kind of quiet you can hear in your bones, she told her mother over the phone before leaving. Montana in summer, she believed, was the perfect antidote to city noise. The drive into Alder had been like rolling backward through time. Paved highways gave way to 2-lane roads that wound through pine-shadowed valleys and narrow passes where the sun broke through in sharp, blinding flashes. The air smelled faintly of dust and warm sap. Their cabin, just outside the old mining town, leaned slightly on its foundations, its porch groaning under their boots as they unloaded gear. A thin column of smoke rose from somewhere far off, too distant to threaten them but close enough to stain the sky faintly brown. For the first 2 days, the trip played out like a series of postcards, hiking the ridge behind the cabin, paddling a battered canoe across Ruby Reservoir, photographing hawks against an endless blue. Genevieve was never without her camera, always pausing to frame a moment the rest of them would have walked past. On Saturday night, they drove into town for dinner at the only restaurant open past 8, a dim place where locals remember her laughing at something Marcus said while Tom Petty played low on the jukebox. Just after 10 that night, they returned to the cabin. Genevieve stepped outside soon after, her phone in one hand, a hoodie slung over her arm. She told Sarah she was going to call her mom before it got too late. The porch light hummed, casting a yellow circle where moths collided in frantic bursts. Beyond that, the dark was thick enough to erase the treeline. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Sarah's first call rang until it died into voicemail. By midnight, the group was driving the narrow road toward Alder, headlights sliding over ditches and fence lines, looking for any trace of her. At 2 a.m., they sat in the sheriff's office beneath the glassy eyes of a mounted elk head, answering the same question over and over. When was the last time you saw her? By dawn, deputies were moving in wide sweeps from the cabin into the hills. Tracks in the dirt suggested she'd taken the path toward the ridge, but they ended abruptly on stony ground. Dogs worked the area, noses low. Helicopters followed the ridge line. Volunteers combed the woods. And then, on Monday morning, the call came in. A phone had been found. It lay 3 miles from the cabin at the entrance to the Whitford mine, a gaping wound in the hillside long since abandoned. The phone screen was cracked, the casing scuffed. No other belongings. No footprints. Just the black, cool air spilling from the tunnel and the faint scent of rust. In those first hours, no one understood how important that place would become. The mine was searched and cleared. The phone was bagged and logged. And Genevieve Rains, 21 years old, a daughter, a friend, a student, was nowhere to be found. For the first week after Genevieve Rains vanished, Alder became a town that lived by the rhythm of the search. Dawn began with the drone of helicopters sweeping low over the ridgeline, their shadows sliding across fields still wet with dew. Convoys of sheriff's trucks and volunteer pickups rolled out along the gravel roads, carrying men and women in high-visibility vests, each clutching maps already smudged with fingerprints. They moved in staggered lines through the waist-high grass, their boots cracking brittle stems, their voices calling her name into the morning air until it was hard to tell if the echo coming back was real or just the landscape repeating itself. The Whitford mine, where her phone had been found, became the center of operations, its rusted head frame looming over tables stacked with radios, thermoses of coffee, and a whiteboard crowded with search grids. Deputies worked the tunnel mouth first, crawling into the shaft with helmet lamps cutting narrow beams through dust and darkness, the air inside thick with the stale tang of metal. No trace, no clothing, no hair, nothing to suggest she'd ever stepped inside. Outside, cadaver dogs worked in tightening spirals, pausing now and then to look back at their handlers with unreadable eyes before pressing on. From above, the search area was vast and hopelessly uneven, steep inclines choked with pine, screeched slopes that shifted underfoot, and narrow ravines where shadows pooled even at midday. Each day without a lead made the terrain feel more like a wall closing in. By the 5th day, reporters began to arrive, their satellite trucks lining the dirt road to the mine. They asked the same questions the deputies were asking each other in private. Why would Genevieve have walked 3 miles in the dark toward an abandoned mine she had no reason to visit? Had she met someone out there? Was she running from something? Sheriff Talbot, a man with 30 years in law enforcement, and a face lined like old leather, told the cameras the department was pursuing all possibilities, though privately he admitted to colleagues that they were chasing smoke. Every friend and relative was interviewed, every phone record and text message pulled. Dylan, Marcus, and Sarah were questioned separately, their stories overlapping but never perfectly matching. It was hard to tell whether the discrepancies were lies or the kind of memory fractures that happen under stress. Search crews worked into the night, the beams of their headlamps bobbing like fireflies across the hills. But each morning ended the same, a gathering at the command table, red X's on the map marking areas already cleared, and still no Genevieve. Rain came on the 8th day, a slow, cold drizzle that turned the dirt to clay and erased what little ground sign they might have had. The sheriff's office scaled back the operation the following morning, leaving only a skeleton crew to respond to tips, most of which came from people far outside the area claiming they'd seen someone matching her description. By the 2-week mark, the official search was over, though locals still kept an eye out, walking fence lines or scanning the edges of the river when they were out fishing. The mine was boarded up again, as if sealing it would keep the questions inside. But Alder did not forget. Every few weeks, someone would bring her up, at the diner over coffee, at the post office while waiting in line, and each time the conversation would follow the same uneasy arc: speculation, a few theories traded like playing cards, then a silence that settled like dust. Theories multiplied in the absence of evidence. Some believed she had been taken by someone passing through, an opportunist who knew the backroads well enough to vanish without leaving a trace. Others whispered about the mine itself, saying there were tunnels far deeper than the sheriff's team had searched, shafts from the 1800s that linked to caverns no map recorded. For Sarah, Marcus, and Dylan, the days after the search ended were worse than the frantic ones before. They left Alder in separate cars, avoiding eye contact, their goodbyes clipped. Back in Spokane, they avoided reporters and stopped answering calls from strangers. Each carried a private version of those last hours, a version they couldn't quite tell anyone else. And somewhere out there, whether in the tangle of pine and rock or beyond the reach of any map, Genevieve Rains had disappeared into a darkness no searchlight could touch. For 3 years, the case of Genevieve Rains sat like a sealed box in the evidence room of the Madison County Sheriff's Department, its files thick with interviews and grainy photographs, its unanswered questions gathering the kind of dust you can't see but can feel. Leads had dried up, witnesses had moved away, and even the occasional anonymous tip was met with a weary skepticism. Then, in the autumn of 2016, a single phone call split that silence wide open. It came from a man in Billings, a former miner named Harold Dent, who claimed he'd overheard something in a bar weeks earlier, a drunken confession from a stranger about a girl who never came out of Whitford. Dent wasn't the type to involve himself with police, but something in the man's voice had lodged under his skin. Detectives drove out to find him, and over 2 hours of questioning, Harold gave them a name: Colton Reese, a drifter with a history of violence, last known to be working odd jobs in mining towns across Montana. Reese's mugshot, pulled from an old arrest record, was the first fresh thing the investigation had seen in years. His face was angular, eyes pale and unblinking, the kind of expression that read more like a challenge than a photograph. Reese had no fixed address, but when deputies finally tracked him to a remote trailer outside Phillipsburg, they found more than they expected: an old hiking pack shoved beneath the bed, containing a cracked digital camera. When they powered it on, only 3 photos remained, their timestamps set to July 2013. The first showed the hills near Alder under a dim twilight sky. The second was darker, a blur of pine and shadow that could have been anywhere. But the third stopped everyone cold. It was taken at the mouth of the Whitford mine. The porch-light glow of a flashlight beam cut through the image, and on the very edge of the frame, a woman's hand, small, pale, unmistakably female, was caught mid-motion, fingers curling as if to shield her face. The photo was grainy, but the nail polish, chipped and blue, matched exactly what Genevieve had been wearing the night she disappeared. Reese denied everything, said the camera wasn't his, said he'd never even been near Alder. But in the weeks that followed, more pieces began to surface. A tire track found in an old search photo matched the worn pattern on Reese's truck. A scrap of fabric snagged on barbed wire near the mine tested positive for Genevieve's DNA, and Harold Dent's account of that overheard confession never wavered. By early winter, Sheriff Talbot made the decision that had eluded him for years. He signed the arrest warrant. Reese was taken in without incident, his wrists locked in steel as snow fell in heavy, muffled sheets around the deputies. For the first time since July 2013, Alder felt like it might have an ending to the story that had gripped it for so long. But as Talbot knew, an arrest was only a doorway. What lay on the other side could be darker still. Winter's thaw brought with it a grim return to the Whitford mine, this time under the steady glare of floodlights and the weight of an arrest that still left more questions than answers. In early March 2017, a mining surveyor hired by the county to inspect old shafts for safety hazards ventured deeper into Whitford than anyone had during the original search. Beyond the boarded entrance, and past the point where sheriff's deputies had once stopped, the tunnel narrowed into a jagged crawlspace, the air so cold it burned the lungs. 50 yards in, the beam of his helmet lamp slid over a dark recess in the rock, a natural cavity about the size of a small room. There, slumped against the far wall, were the skeletal remains of a human body. The faded blue of a weathered hoodie still clung to the bones, its zipper half pulled as if frozen in the act of fastening it. The surveyor backed out in silence, his breath shallow, and radioed for the sheriff's office. Forensics moved in carefully, their gloves brushing away years of fine dust as they catalogued every scrap, every fragment. Dental records confirmed what the chipped nail polish already told them: it was Genevieve Rains. The discovery detonated through Alder like a charge in dry rock. People who had long since stopped talking about her now spoke her name in hushed, stunned tones at the diner, at the gas station, at the school drop-off line. In the sheriff's office, the find wasn't just confirmation of her fate, it was a map of the last moments of her life. The cavity where she'd been left was invisible from the main shaft, shielded by an outcropping of quartz. Anyone not looking for it would have passed right by. And in that detail lay the most chilling truth. Someone had put her there deliberately, and someone had known the mine well enough to choose the perfect blind spot. Reese, now sitting in the county jail, watched the news of the discovery from behind thick glass. When detectives entered the interview room later that week, he didn't look up, didn't speak, just sat with his arms folded tight across his chest. But the forensics didn't need his words. Soil samples from his boots, seized during the arrest, matched the unique mineral composition inside that specific chamber of Whitford, traces of a rare feldspar only found in that seam. Coupled with the photograph from his camera and the DNA evidence, the mine's hidden chamber was the final nail. The prosecutor announced they would pursue a first-degree murder charge, citing premeditation in both the abduction and concealment of the body. Outside the courthouse, snow still clung to the edges of the sidewalk, but in the center of town, the air felt sharper, clearer, as if Alder itself had been holding its breath for nearly 4 years and could finally let it go. Yet, for all the relief that came with finding Genevieve, The manner of her discovery left an aftertaste no verdict could wash away. She had been there the whole time, silent in the cold dark, while life went on just 3 miles away. The trial of Colton Reese began in late autumn, the courthouse in Virginia City transformed into a crucible where 4 years of speculation, rumor, and grief condensed into sworn testimony and photographs too stark for the evening news. Reese sat at the defense table in a pressed shirt that didn't quite fit, his pale eyes scanning the jury with the same flat, unreadable stare that had unsettled detectives from the start. The prosecution built its case like a slow tightening vice, starting with the recovered photograph, then the DNA from the barbed wire, the soil from his boots, and finally, the testimony of Harold Dent, whose memory of the drunken confession was clear, steady, and punctuated by the kind of detail that couldn't be invented. But the moment that shifted the entire weight of the room came midway through the second week, when the state's final witness, a cellmate from Reese's short stay in county lockup, took the stand. He told the court how Reese, on a night when the power flickered and the cell block was cloaked in near darkness, had described luring Genevieve out of the cabin after a fight with her friends, promising to show her something the tourists never get to see. He led her to Whitford, knowing the mine's layout from his own work in the area, and forced her into the hidden cavity. She was alive when he left her there, the cellmate testified, her pleas muffled by the earth and stone around her. The jurors didn't look at Reese after that. Some looked at the floor, others at the judge, as if they needed an anchor in the room to steady themselves. The defense tried to paint the account as jailhouse opportunism, but when the medical examiner explained that Genevieve had likely died from exposure and dehydration rather than an immediate injury, the cellmate's words took on a darker, undeniable truth. Closing arguments turned the courtroom into a pressure chamber, the prosecutor speaking not just of evidence but of the deliberate cruelty of leaving a living person in the dark to die, the defense grasping at the possibility of a coerced confession. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours before returning with the verdict, guilty on all counts. When the sentence was read, life without parole, Reese showed no reaction, only a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth that could have been a smirk, or nothing at all. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling, soft and unhurried, covering the courthouse steps where Genevieve's parents stood together, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles whitened. In Alder, the news spread faster than the weather, and for the first time in years, the story had an ending, though not the one anyone had prayed for. The mine would be sealed for good, the boards nailed across its mouth like a final, permanent shutter. But in the quiet hours, when the wind moved through the pines in the hills above town, there were still those who swore they could hear a faint echo from deep underground, not a voice exactly, but the memory of one, carried on the cold air, refusing to be forgotten.